In the brutal winter of 1944, a frozen hell erupted. Men fought and died, their breath misting in the frigid air, for every inch of contested ground. Across an unsuspecting front, Nazi Germany launched its final, desperate gamble, a monumental offensive that caught the world entirely by surprise. Beneath the quiet, treacherous snow lay the hopes and fears of millions. This was the moment the fate of a war hung in the balance. By late 1944, the tide of World War II seemed clear. Yet, one man still dared to dream of reversing the inevitable. From the shadows of his bunker, Hitler envisioned a final, audacious plan. Operation Wacht am Rhein, a desperate bet against destiny. Cloaked in absolute secrecy, forces gathered for an all-or-nothing offensive. The very heart of Nazi Germany was staking its last hope. It was a monstrous gamble, designed to shatter the Allied advance, to tear apart their alliance, and finally, to turn the tide of World War II. The stakes were immense, truly global. Failure meant utter annihilation for Nazi Germany. Success could prolong the conflict indefinitely, changing history. This was to be a winter bloodbath, a last furious lunge through the unsuspecting Ardennes, a blow that would cripple the Allies. On that chilling December morning, 1944, the world awoke to the unthinkable. A massive surprise attack was tearing through the Western Front. Thousands of tanks, hundreds of thousands of men, spearheaded by Hitler's most fanatical divisions, surged forward into the heart of Europe. For weeks, the very existence of the Western Allies hung by a thread. The immediate danger was real, a world-altering threat. This is the story of that chilling start, the desperate struggles, and the incredible human spirit forged in the crucible of winter. Hitler's last gamble, a defiant roar against the dying light, would become the epic, tragic tale of the winter bloodbath. Late in 1944, a fragile quiet settled over the Western Front. After years of relentless fighting, a weary peace seemed to embrace the land. Allied forces, pushing deep into Europe, sensed the end. A long, brutal journey was nearing its quiet conclusion, or so they believed. The relentless march across liberated lands had been a triumph, but it left the Allied lines stretched, almost to their breaking point. A deceptive calm, a whispered promise of peace that masked the churning desperation of a defeated but still dangerous foe. Victory tasted sweet. The swift advance from Normandy had fueled a powerful sense of Allied overconfidence. High commands began to speak of the war ending by Christmas, a natural human hope, perhaps blinding them to reality. Logistical challenges, though growing, seemed minor against the tide of success. The focus shifted from defense to pursuit. Such was the prevailing mood. The mighty war machine of Nazi Germany appeared to be collapsing, day by agonizing day. Vigilance, that sharp edge of fear, began to dull. The long shadow of constant danger seemed to recede for a while. The Ardennes, a quiet sector, was deemed unsuitable for any major attack. A quiet lull, a place for new troops to gather strength. Optimism was infectious, from the highest general to the newest recruit. The belief in an imminent end was a powerful comfort. Yet, beneath this calm, a sinister plan was quietly brewing. The world was about to learn a harsh lesson in false hope, but deep within Nazi Germany, the reality was starker, a landscape of ruin and despair. The Reich was bleeding out. Manpower was dwindling, resources exhausted. The once formidable Wehrmacht was a shadow of its former terrifying self. Morale was crumbling, yet fanaticism, fueled by propaganda, still burned in some, a desperate flame in the darkness. At the heart of this dying regime, Hitler, increasingly isolated, clung to his twisted vision of victory. His mind, now a crucible of delusion, sought one final audacious gamble to reverse the inevitable tide of defeat. Old men and young boys, conscripted into service, were the last desperate reserves. A nation bled dry, pushed to its very limits. The industrial might that once fueled Nazi Germany was shattered. Yet, a surprising number of elite units remained hidden, waiting, driven by fear, by loyalty, and by a desperate love of their homeland. They were still a formidable, albeit depleted, force. On paper, the Allies seemed overwhelming. Yet, even depleted, some German units retained powerful heavy weaponry. Discipline and training remained sharp. The German military tradition, forged in decades of conflict, endured even now. The brutal Eastern Front against the Soviet Union had bled them white, but critical units were constantly being shuffled. From the ashes of defeat, a plan was meticulously crafted. A plan built on secrecy, surprise, and sheer audacity. Hitler, against all counsel, believed in one last, decisive blow. He saw opportunity where others saw only ruin. Despite overwhelming odds, the desperate vision of their Führer ignited a flicker of hope, or perhaps just grim resolve. Under the cloak of winter's embrace, forces began to gather, moving like ghosts through the moonless nights. This was not the full might of 1940, but a concentrated force, aiming to strike at the heart of Allied complacency. The Allied advance had been swift, but it left them vulnerable. Their lines were stretched, their strength diluted. The long, demanding march had taken its toll, and a sense of routine had replaced the urgent vigilance of earlier days. The Ardennes sector, deemed impregnable due to its terrain, was thinly held. A quiet backwater no one expected to erupt. Intelligence reports, clouded by overconfidence, underestimated Nazi Germany's capacity for one final, desperate struggle. A dangerous assumption that the enemy was truly broken. They had not yet accounted for the true depth of desperation. For Hitler, this was his last throw of the dice, a desperate gamble born from an unshakable belief in his own destiny. He envisioned a crushing blow, splitting the Western Allies and forcing them to negotiate, just as in the Great War. Against all reason, he clung to the hope that a return to Blitzkrieg's thunder could change the course of history. The plan was shrouded in absolute secrecy. Every whisper, every movement hidden from Allied eyes. A silent, audacious secret. A winter bloodbath poised to erupt, forever changing the Western Front in 1944. The bitter winter of 1944 held its breath. A fragile peace before a storm no one truly expected. After months of relentless fighting, the Allied forces believed the long, brutal war was finally winding down. But in the heart of the Ardennes, a dark, desperate gamble was about to unfold. Hitler, clinging to a fading hope, launched his last, audacious offensive on December 16, 1944. Under the cloak of an impenetrable fog, the Nazi German spearhead struck, a chilling surprise. The sudden thunder of artillery ripped through the quiet dawn, shaking the very ground. Many were young, inexperienced, thrust into a maelstrom they couldn't comprehend. Out of the mist, ghost-like, poured columns of Nazi German troops, resolute and unyielding. They sought a swift breakthrough, a final, desperate stroke to turn the tide of a losing war. The initial days were a blur of chaos, as defensive lines buckled under relentless pressure. Among the German units was Kampfgruppe Peiper, notorious for its brutal efficiency. Near Malmedy, on December 17th, American soldiers were captured, their weapons laid down. They were told to assemble in a field, under the cold, indifferent gaze of their captors. Then, without warning, the machine guns opened fire, shattering the winter silence. Many tried to flee, only to be cut down in the unforgiving, blood-stained snow. The Malmedy massacre, a dark stain on the soul of war, served as a chilling warning. Yet, amidst the terror, pockets of fierce resistance began to coalesce, against all odds. Northward lay Elsenborn Ridge, a critical gateway the Nazi Germans desperately needed to seize. For the Americans, holding this ridge became a matter of life and death, of one lost, all lost. Wave after wave of Nazi German assault crashed against the determined American lines there. Artillery rained down, turning the frozen earth into a hellscape, yet they held. With incredible resolve, the defenders bought precious time, disrupting the enemy's grand design. Elsenborn Ridge stood unyielding, a monument to a courage that refused to break. Further south, St. Vith, a vital crossroads, became another focal point of the struggle. The 7th Armored Division and others dug in, knowing its fall would sever supply lines. What unfolded was a brutal, relentless struggle, street by blood-soaked street. Every building, every corner became a battleground. Defended with desperate tenacity, the Nazi German advance faltered, bogged down by unforeseen, stubborn resistance. The price was high, paid in blood and frozen suffering, but the delay was priceless. St. Vith, though eventually overrun, bought crucial days, shattering the German timetable. These were days of individual heroism, where ordinary men performed extraordinary feats. Each lost hour, each lost mile, chipped away at the Nazi-German dream of victory. Their blitzkrieg was slowing to a crawl, trapped in the unforgiving winter landscape. The snow and fog, once an ally, now hindered the Nazi-German supply lines and movements. As the flanks held, the Nazi-German spearhead carved deeper, seeking a new objective. Bastogne, a hub of 7 key roads, now became a magnet for destiny. By December 20th, the 101st Airborne Division found itself completely encircled. They were trapped, outmatched, facing an impossible, relentless Nazi-German assault. Then came the ultimatum, a demand for surrender, promising a hopeless fight. Brigadier General McAuliffe's answer, delivered with blunt defiance, echoed history's call. Nuts! A single word, but it was a roar of defiance that ignited a fighting spirit. The winter of 1944 held a cruel grip, a blanket of despair over the Ardennes, hiding a terrible secret. Days turned into weeks, shrouded in fog and snow. Hope itself seemed frozen, trapped beneath the relentless clouds. Under this shroud, Hitler's desperate gamble unfolded, a silent, deadly thrust through the heart of winter. Yet, even in the darkest hours, a flicker of defiance burned, refusing to be extinguished by the encroaching shadows. Then, a change. On December 23, 1944, the heavens themselves seemed to shift, offering a new dawn. The skies, long choked by winter's breath, began to clear. A fragile hope emerged from the suffocating fog. It was a subtle change at first, a whisper of wind, but the strategic implications were utterly profound. With clear skies came power. The overwhelming might of Allied air power was finally unleashed upon the foe. Our pilots, grounded for so long, now soared, carrying the desperate hopes of those trapped below. They struck with precision, turning Nazi Germany's vital supply lines into a chaotic, fiery inferno. Every fuel truck, every ammunition depot, every lifeline for the German thrust became a target, decimated from above. What the ground forces had endured, the air now avenged. The relentless air assault was a brutal, necessary answer. Meanwhile, Bastogne, a tiny Belgian town, remained a beacon of defiance, besieged and isolated, yet unbroken. The price of holding was immense, but the men of the 101st Airborne clung to every inch of that frozen earth. And then, a sight to stir the soul. The unwavering silhouette of our C-47s, breaching the winter's gray veil. Through flak and frozen air, they brought life, ammunition, medicine, and the unwavering promise of aid. Each crate was a lifeline, each parachute a symbol that they were not forgotten, not abandoned to the cold. Far to the south, General Patton's Third Army was a whirlwind, turning on a dime, racing towards their brothers. They pushed through impossible terrain, fueled by a ferocious will, a living embodiment of relentless courage. Every mile gained was a testament to sheer grit, every obstacle overcome a step closer to deliverance. And then, the moment. The link-up, a powerful embrace. Tears and cheers mingling in the freezing air. The siege of Bastogne was broken. A sigh of relief, deep and profound, echoed across the snow-covered fields. But the fight was far from over. Nazi Germany, in its death throes, still harbored one last desperate gamble. Operation Bodenplatte, December 31st, 1944. A final, desperate roll of the dice for the beleaguered Luftwaffe. they launched nearly 1,000 aircraft, a last, audacious bid to cripple Allied air power once and for all. The skies erupted. A ferocious, chaotic ballet of death unfolded above the unsuspecting airfields. Many Allied planes were destroyed on the ground. A brutal, unexpected blow to our strategic air superiority. Yet, our defenders rose to meet them, both from the ground and from the few planes that survived the initial onslaught. The cost for Nazi Germany was catastrophic. Over 300 of their precious aircraft were lost, pilots irreplaceable. It was a Pyrrhic victory for Hitler, draining the last reserves of his once mighty Luftwaffe. The tide had truly turned. A coordinated Allied counteroffensive began, relentlessly pushing the enemy back. From every direction, our armies advanced, closing the bulge, tightening the noose around the Nazi German forces. The strategic initiative was firmly ours. The desperate gamble had only accelerated Nazi Germany's ultimate demise. Finally, the link-up at Houffalize, a symbolic closure to the Battle of the Bulge on January 16, 1945. Two halves of a torn front, now reconnected. A moment of shared exhaustion and profound victory. Nazi Germany's last strategic reserves, their elite panzer divisions, were now utterly exhausted. The winter bloodbath had cost them dearly, not just men, but the very machines of their war machine. There was no turning back, no hope left. The path to inevitable collapse lay brutally clear before them. The Western Front was now secure, the Allied forces ready for the final decisive push towards the heartland. This brutal winter had broken the back of a desperate empire, paving the way for the end of its tyranny. The road to Berlin, though still arduous, was now undeniably open. The final act was about to begin. The winter bloodbath of 1944 was over, but its grim harvest was just beginning. This was the twilight of a twisted dream. By April 1945, the colossal Soviet war machine turned its gaze toward Berlin, the very heart of Nazi Germany. A cold, bitter resolve filled the air. A final, terrible accounting for years of bloodshed was at hand. Across the frozen Oder-Neisse line, the Soviet Red Army amassed for their ultimate assault. A force beyond measure, millions of men, thousands of tanks. A relentless tide ready to sweep away the last vestiges of defiance. Opposing them, the last defenders of Nazi Germany, a desperate mix of old men and boys, stood on hollow ground. The thunder of 1,000 guns heralded the opening act of hell, the brutal battle of the Silo Heights. Every inch of the rugged heights became a battleground, soaked in blood and sacrifice, a relentless struggle. For days, the land burned. A brutal struggle that bought precious time for Berlin, but at a terrible price. Despite the ferocity, the Soviet advance was unstoppable, fueled by years of suffering and a yearning for justice. As Silo finally fell, Berlin itself was encircled, its fate sealed beneath a sky of ash and fire. The city, once a symbol of power, now trembled, its people caught in a nightmare of their own making. The battle for Berlin descended into a merciless, street-to-street brawl, a struggle for every single stone. Amidst the ruins, life became a desperate fight for survival, a testament to raw, unyielding courage. Every corner, every window held hidden dangers. The city had become a deadly, suffocating labyrinth. Inch by painful inch, they clawed their way forward, driven by the promise of victory. So close, yet so costly. Deep beneath the crumbling city, in the grim silence of the Führer bunker, a different kind of horror unfolded. Hitler, a ghost of his former self, clung to delusions of victory, even as the walls closed in around him. The world outside was collapsing, yet within those concrete confines, madness held sway, denying the inevitable truth. Fear and despair were palpable. The dreams of a 1,000-year Reich were crumbling into nothingness. As April 1945 drew to a close, the final desperate act of the dictator's life was about to play out. In his final moments, isolated and defeated, Hitler chose oblivion, a cowardly escape from justice. On April 30, 1945, the architect of so much suffering vanished, leaving behind a world in ruins. Above ground, the relentless march continued, eyes fixed on one final symbolic prize: the Reichstag building. Around the colossal structure, the last desperate defenders fought, knowing their cause was utterly lost. Every step up its grand staircase was a testament to sacrifice, a silent prayer for lasting peace. Then, on May 10, 1945, the red banner of victory unfurled, a vibrant splash of hope against a desolate sky. It was the ultimate consequence, the catastrophic end of Nazi Germany. A final, brutal chapter closed forever. The war in Europe was over, but the scars would forever remind us of freedom's terrible, hard-won price. The echoes of Hitler's final gamble, the winter bloodbath of 1944, still chill the air. A desperate, final stand against the inevitable. From frozen fields, the relentless conflict raged, an unstoppable tide reaching the very heart of Nazi Germany, leading to the brutal Battle of Berlin. Such colossal struggles left an unfillable void. The monumental human cost, etched forever in silent tears, remains a solemn, heartbreaking testament to war. Strategically, these final, desperate struggles sealed a fate. Each painful sacrifice and every hard-won inch irrevocably shifted the world's balance, guiding us. These were the crucibles, forging the final shape of World War II in Europe. A chapter of unimaginable sacrifice, now drawing to a close. The historical significance endures, a powerful, somber lesson. The winter's bloodbath remains a haunting reminder of humanity's resilience and folly. Amidst such despair, courage often shone brightest. Sacrifice, profound and selfless, carved a path through the darkest night, a light remembered. Ultimately, the tyranny of Nazi Germany crumbled, a triumph born from immense suffering, reminding us that the human spirit, united, can overcome any darkness. These profound stories demand our reflection. Share your thoughts below and join us again as we unravel more epic moments from our shared history.